Hello, everyone. My name is David Flaherty. I'm the CEO of Magellan Strategies. I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar today, where we're going to talk about a couple of public safety ballot measures that we were involved in earlier this year. Please wait to the end of the presentation to ask any questions. This will take about 25 minutes. And again, we just want to thank you for attending our webinar today. Who are we? Well, Magellan Strategies, we're a public opinion research firm. We've been in Colorado for 15 years. We've conducted over 500 voter opinion surveys measuring support and opposition for various funding measures, ballot measures, and we also do some public policy survey work. Here's just an example of some of the organizations and special districts and governments that we've helped out over the last 15 years. So we have a lot of experience at doing this. So again, just an idea of who we are. We're also members of these government-related entities, CCI, CML, Special Districts Association, as well as CCCMA. So we're not new to government work. We just probably haven't advertised it that much. But what we're going to talk about today is two different public safety ballot measures that we conducted, one for the City of Lafayette and one for Monument. This is not going to get into very deep statewide sort of Coloradan viewpoints of public safety, police, defunding the police in that measure. What we're going to be doing is looking at two different ballot measures that are seeking voter approval in one city that's more Democrat and leans progressive, and another one that's more conservative and leans Republican. The Democratic one being the City of Lafayette, and the town of Monument being the other down just north of Colorado Springs. And as I mentioned before, similar public safety ballot measures within different communities. Both public safety ballot measures inform respondents of funds being used to hire additional police officers. And so let's continue on now. And just to get more into the community comparisons. One, City of Lafayette, they have 21,000 active voters, and likely turnout this November is around 9,000 voters. The town of Monument, on the other hand, has about 7,300 active voters and has a smaller number, about 3,500 likely voters. But what I really wanted to bring attention to is town of Monument, turnout in the past for an odd year election has been around 54%. In City of Lafayette, turnout has roughly been 52%. 52% Democratic. So let's start with the Monument survey first. Our collection methodology is MMS text messaging. What is that? Well, this image on the left-hand side that you can see is basically was sent to nearly half of all registered voters in the town of Monument, inviting them to participate in an important survey regarding funding options for police department services and programs. It's professional looking. It has the town logo on it. Therefore, people are more likely to trust that this is not some sort of spammy communication. And we had really good engagement. And for a likely turnout of only 3,500 voters, 563 responded and completed this survey back in April. The margin of error is plus or minus 4%. My point being, though, if you've ever been familiar with doing telephone surveys with such a small universe to talk to, 500 responses is a really good response rate for a community of this size. And basically, we do, the uninformed ballot test, Monument Police funding. If an election were being held today, would you vote yes and approve a 0.5% sales tax increase to generate new funding for police department services and programs, or would you vote no and reject it? On the left-hand side, you can see the total responses were 64% would approve, 26% would reject. Interestingly enough, in this Republican community, you see overwhelmingly support for public safety in the police department before we even tell them how the money is going to be spent and what it's going to be used for. That's followed by seniors and women. Support levels are very high. Now, among Democrat and unaffiliated voters, support is much lower, but it is still more than a majority. But my point being of sharing this slide is just that in this Republican community, there's overwhelmingly supportive back the blue sentiment. Then after our approach of doing ballot measures is now after we've read the uninformed ballot test to them basically saying, look, we're going to raise, this would raise the sales tax 0.5%. I'm now going to give you some more information about how this money would be spent and what it would be used on. And that's when we get into information questions. And we do this because this is information that's very likely to be told during a campaign. First and foremost, 4 to 5 officers would be on patrol at all times. This money would help reduce response times. It would help update arrest report software and computers. It would help bring the vehicle fleet in the police department up to speed after long overdue maintenance and replacement issues. Also, they would hire a 5th Squad Patrol unit to focus on fighting, reducing break-ins, burglaries, drug dealings, and human trafficking. One unique aspect of this is that they would hire a 2nd female detective to address sexual assault and other sensitive issues and cases and so forth. We're doing this because this is what the police department needs, why the chief wants this revenue, and educating and inform voters. So it's like, if you approve this, this is how the money would be spent. Finally, then we would get to, we rank these questions so that folks can understand, out of all the things that we tested about how the money was going to be spent, what was the one issue that, the one items that really people said, I would be willing to vote for that. And that was updating the arrest and report software of police computers. Unfortunately, in Monument, they're not on the same program or platform as El Paso County law enforcement or Colorado Springs law enforcement. So as you can see, many of these things that they want to spend the money on are strongly supported by the community. After we read those information questions to them, we then again read them the ballot measure, telling them it's going to raise $1.4 million annually. It's going to be a 0.5-cent sales tax. Now that you've heard some and read some information, I want to ask you again, would you support or oppose it? Support now is at 74%. Opposition is at 19%. As you can see, Democrats and unaffiliated voters now, nearly 2/3 of them are supporting it, where before only half would. This is the proper way to educate and inform a community about a ballot measure, rather than just throwing it out there and not telling them that. Because as you can see, support for this ballot measure was increased across the board among all voter subgroups. And as you can see, overall, support increased by 10 points, opposition declined by 7, and undecided went down by 3 points. What we also like to do is ask a follow-up question. It's like, great, we measured the quantitative, but let's measure the qualitative, meaning tell us why you would vote yes and approve the sales tax. So the town can understand what is motivating support. And here's the major themes. Police need the equipment. We back the blue. It's a small price to pay. Our community is growing and we need these things. And they understand the police force in Monument needs more resources to address a larger population. And also just simply, police are important to the community. And at the same time, voting support, measuring opposition. Why would 19% of voters intend to vote no and reject it? 1, they cannot afford the tax increase. 2, there's always a pocket of voters in every community in Colorado that says you need to work with the money you have, just like me and my family. There's nothing wrong with that viewpoint, but that leads on many people, especially seniors and people on fixed incomes. Some people do not think that the additional resources are needed. And there was a slight comments regarding defunding the police, and that defunding the police, and giving them more resources and hiring more officers is not the solution in the wake of, the George Floyd arrest tragedies and other ongoing abuses of police force on people of color. So please understand, we like to look at both sides of the issue so that, city leaders and staff understand why people view and how they view the ballot measure. Okay, now let's talk about the Lafayette survey data collection methodology. On the left, again, this was an MMS text only, a text survey, but we also included some phones on this survey. The reason we also usually use phones is that we like to interview older voters, 65 and older, that may be less likely to participate in a texting survey. I'm not saying that we're not going to get in the unweighted data no responses at all from seniors through the text. Actually, it's pretty darn good. But to give them an extra way to participate in the survey and making sure that we're measuring, those seniors, we usually do about 100 phone calls. So this survey had a total sample of 861 likely voters. The interviews were conducted in mid-June. It has a margin of error plus or minus 3.2%. And again, I want to remind you, the city of Lafayette is much more progressive and democratic than the town of Monument. So now we're looking at a more democratic community. Some other good practices. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The city of Lafayette is fiscally responsible and spends taxpayer money wisely. 62% agree, 17% disagree. This is always a good question to ask, because if there is some history or there's an impression among the community that their local government doesn't spend money wisely, they're not going to, we need to know, we want to measure that, because they're not going to support a ballot measure, usually regardless of what the purpose may be. And like in this instance, which would be more funds for public safety, that included both police and fire department, by the way. So 62%, that's a good reading. That's a good measurement. Something below 50%, there's more of a story that needs to be told when you're going to the voters to ask them to approve a ballot measure that will increase their taxes. Okay, we did a unique A/B test in this survey. City staff wanted us to test one ballot measure that would hire 4 police officers and one that would not. They wanted to know and see if there was a difference, or if there was sentiment where a ballot measure is more likely to pass without police officers because they just, a large portion of their community feel that additional officers is not a good idea. So version A had no police officers, and it would be a 0.32% sales tax increase. It's going to raise $1.4 million annually and cost 16 cents on a $50 purchase. 61% of folks said yes, they would approve it, and 28% know that they would reject it. Interestingly enough, support is overwhelming among Democratic voters and a strong majority among unaffiliated voters. Seniors, as I mentioned, really matter. They're usually a very large voting bloc in odd-year elections. And it's Republicans that actually would reject the ballot measure, probably more along the lines simply because of cost. But again, we're measuring the uninformed ballot test. I haven't told you anything about it. What do you think? Now, version B with the police officers, just so you understand, just on the uninformed ballot test, we find that 61% would vote yes and approve, 32% would vote no and reject. As you can see, the increase being asked for is higher because of the officers, the cost of their salaries and such. It would be a 0.42% sales tax increase, and it would raise an estimated $1.89 million annually. As you can see here, 74% of Democrats would support this, 60% of Republicans, 54% of seniors, yet 72% of Republicans would oppose it. And understand something too, folks. Version A was only read to some voters and version B was read to other voters. They did not both hear these ballot measures. Then we got into our information questions. We're now going to tell you some information about how the money would be spent and why we're asking for this. So the information questions, version A, there were 5 of them. And one unique and very interesting thing about this public safety ballot measure was the hiring of mental health co-responders to accompany police on calls involving behavioral health, issues to minimize violence, arrests, and the use of jails. And down at the bottom, the maintenance of police body-worn cameras and costs associated with video maintenance and file storage. And again, as you can see, 80% of respondents on all of these would say, yes, I would support it. Version B had a 6th message or 6th information question on number 5, where it says the hiring of 4 police officers. This will allow the department to have a minimum of 3 officers on duty at all times rather than 2. The additional officers will help reduce response times and put more focus on community policing. As you can see here, so that only 72% supported the hiring of the police officers, and 22% said that they were more likely to reject it. That's a quantifiable measurement, really, of Democratic and likely progressive voters that are concerned regarding police force towards people of color. However, 72% is a very strong support reading. And the bottom line is that people would likely again, support this. So as you can see, there is a slight difference between A and B. And then again, we go to the informed ballot test. Now that you've heard information, I'm going to ask you again, would you support a 0.32% sales tax increase? And as you can see now, the support among Republicans has gone up significantly to 65%. And 77% overall would vote to support this. The version B with police officers, we can see, is 10 points lower, where 67% would vote yes and approve it. These Republicans are less likely to approve it. However, the support has grown. But the bottom line is we helped the city of Lafayette figure out what's the difference if we have police officers and what if we did not, regardless really of support overwhelming for these two different ballot measures. So what are the differences between the two? Over on the left-hand column here, we can see that 61% would approve it before we tell them anything, with varying levels of opposition. After on the informed ballot test, we see that version A that did not include the police officers, support goes up 16%. In version B that does include the police officers, support only went up 6%, likely because of the reluctance to have additional police officers on the force. Again, we asked an open-ended ballot measure. Please describe the reasons why you would vote yes and approve a 0.32% sales tax increase. Public safety services are essential. For those of you that don't know, Lafayette is very close to Boulder, and with the tragedy of the shooting that happened in Boulder earlier this year, that very well may have a lot of influence there. But then there's other sentiment. We are all responsible community and everyone has benefits. I like the idea of pairing mental health, social worker aspect to public safety. That's the other unique thing. That was very well received among very many Democratic and more liberal voters. They felt that that was a great idea and is a great step forward to minimize any sort of police force towards people of color that obviously is unacceptable. Same thing in version B. What are the major reasons why you're voting yes? Voters value these services. The sales tax is shared by all and paid by rather than just homeowners, and the amount of the tax is acceptable. Why would people vote no? Taxes are too high already. Cities should live within its means. Sales taxes actually hurt the poor. There's a lot of that sentiment in this survey where they feel that homeowners who are wealthier should be paying the tax, where sales taxes should not be paid by people that rent and are less likely to have lower incomes. And again, similar responses to why people on version tax B would vote no. Questions? And again, thank you for your time.